Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. I am Munir Lazouzi, a medical device expert specialized on quality and regulatory affairs. My mission is to help you learn how to place a compliant medical device on the market. For that, I'll share with you my experience and the one of others on this podcast. Are you ready for your dose of regulation and standard today? Okay, so let the show begin. Hello, EasyMed Nation. Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Today, we'll have a special topic, which is software validation. I know that a lot of companies are struggling with that and they don't really know how to do it or which process to follow. And for that, I invited two special guests to help you. They are from the company General Digital Software Services. It's the Vice President, Bill Stamm, and the Director for Independent Verification and Validation, which is Rafael Blanco. And they will help us to have a better understanding of the steps to follow, of the requirements, of the mistakes not to do. So I think this will be really a great episode for you. Before to start, just want to inform you that this podcast is available on different platforms. As I've said, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, and recently I added a new one, which is Google Podcasts. So if you are using Google Podcasts, so you can also find the Medical Device Made Easy podcast on this platform. So thank you very much. So with Google Podcasts, I think you can also have access to Google Home. So if you have a Google Home, try it. Let me know if this is working. Okay. So let's go now. Let's jump now on the topic and let's have our two guests. So Bill Stamm and Rafael Blanco. So let's go. Hello, everyone. So we are here at the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. And today, as I informed you, so we have a guest. So this is Vice President Bill Stamm from General Digital Software Services. And we will talk specifically about software validations. And I think we have really the right SMEs here to help us understand that. To try to understand also the regulations and what is requested from our companies, so our medical device companies. So, Bill, it's your stage. So please, can you make an introduction of yourself and then also of your company?
Yes, well, thank you very much. We appreciate the time and the discussion on this very important topic. I'm Bill Stamm. As you heard, I'm Vice President of General Digital Software Services. I'm here with my Director of Independent Verification and Validation, Rafael Blanco. General Digital has started as a software company 45 years ago, and we've specialized in safety critical software throughout the entirety of the company. And we specialize in FAA, DO 178, as well as FDA 62304 type validation and certification in the two main markets that we serve.
Right. So I think medical device is one part of your business. You have many other businesses, if I can say. It's not the only one. But do you see on medical devices kind of a growing business or with software? Do you see more work coming from this kind of industry?
Yes, the FDA with their certification level is a little bit behind the FAA and the aerospace and avionics industry, and the software component is still something people are trying to figure out. So with our expertise in this area, we're very well positioned and educated to help people very efficiently and cost effectively meet the demands of the FAA. The independent verification is really the part for the FDA, and now coming to Europe with the MDR, that separates the validation part of it as a really critical aspect to this.
Okay, so 45 years of existence, if I can say. So you had, I think, many customers, many missions. So is there anything like kind of a funny anecdote or something that you can maybe share with us, or something that people can try to listen to that?
There's many, but there is one that comes to mind. As we work in many industries, as you said, the Department of Defense and weapons is one of them. So DO 178, like 62304, is the certification level that you try to hit. So in the avionics industry, that is something that we'll see in the SRS and the SAL. For a certain missile system, they asked us for that in the beginning. And in the end, it became too tedious and took too long to get to market. So the joke was, we don't need it to be exact, we just need it to be close. Okay. So we still did it to the standard, but we like to do things exactly, but maybe perhaps it's not always required. So.
Yeah, it's good. So I hope we don't have the same kind of customers from the medical device people asking for, not exact, but that's good. Let's go maybe now on the subject. So as I said, the objective is really to explain to the people, to the medical device industry, what is required for software validation. We hear that a lot of times now. I think it's also a new requirement from the ISO 13485 for the quality management system. So I want to hear from you kind of steps that people can really digest and understand. And then can also bring to them to understand that maybe it's not so difficult, if I can say, or not so difficult. I mean, it's kind of an expertise, but it's something that they can really understand in the big picture.
Yeah, well, I'll give the overview. Is basically it's a very important process to follow correctly from the beginning.
Yeah,
we will say that over and over, that the process and the procedures are dictated very clearly by the governing body. In this case, the FDA. And you start with the intended use of a medical device, and then you bring the documentation and also the work down to the requirements document, the system level requirements, and then you just keep working down through in order with the proper processes and the separate department from development to actually do the development and testing. So as you're creating the SRS and the software documentation, the SDD, the architecture, you also should be doing code reviews and things like that. At some point, the independent verification and validation needs to be done, and test cases need to be created. During this process of development, that is something that has to be worked into the process, or else you'll be spending money and time doing this later at a time when it's a little too late in the process to actually do it. So I'll let Rafael talk a little bit about where in the development side the test cases come into play and why it's important that independence is adhered to.
And just to emphasize that, so mainly we are talking here, we can talk about a medical device that contains a software or a software that is a medical device by himself. So it's kind of the same process that we are following.
Yes, it's the same process. Always start with the requirements, which is actually what dictates how you're supposed to code the device, whether it's a device that is mechanical or a software-only device. You still need to understand what it's supposed to do, so that when you're coding it and you test it, you need to make sure that it's hitting the things that you said it was supposed to do.
Okay, good. So let's dig on the technical part then.
Sure. Well, the V&V aspect of the things, you want to make sure that you start that process extremely early in the development process. The further you wait, the more costly it's going to become.
So it means that mainly mainly what I suppose that on the procedure that we are creating, on the planning phase, it's more like something that should be already discussed and already planned, and not waiting that we are moving forward on the creation of the product or the software, that we are starting to think, oh, we forgot we should do this and we didn't do that. So as you mentioned, something that we should really plan early in our process.
Absolutely. Basically, when you start writing your system software high-level requirements, you always want to keep in mind that those requirements, whatever requirements you write, need to be testable. So a lot of times people will create, or companies will create, requirements without that thought process behind it. And further down the line, they realize that certain requirements can't be tested. Now you got to go all the way back and redo all the processes and do the requirements, which is going to be very costly.
Yeah.
And in terms of validation, you want to do validation all throughout the development process. Basically, in terms of 1345, you want to make sure that all the software tools that are being used by the development team and the verification team is also validated. So any kind of tools that you use that's going to affect the output of any kind of process, you really want to look at that validation with the risk analysis behind it.
Okay, so just to summarize that, so mainly here we are talking about validation of products, but before to validate the product, we have first to think about all the software that we are using to validate the product, if I can say. I suppose like some software used for statistical measures or some softwares used for some technical aspects. So before to start, we should confirm that those software are kind of validated. So this is mainly what you are saying.
Yes, especially if it's something that you're taking credit for in any kind of certification process. So if you're using a static analysis tool and you're going to claim that you've executed this static analysis in your validation plan, you want to have a validation for the actual tool that you're using to make sure that it's producing that you really.
Yeah.
So it's not just verification validation of the software that's on the system, but you also have to keep in mind the validation of all the tools surrounding the development of that system.
This is something that we explain to customers and startups in layman's terms. Is when you go to the gas pump or the petrol station, someone comes in to certify that pump is actually giving you the correct amount of gasoline or petrol.
Sure.
So that's what the validation of the tools does, to make sure that what we output as a deliverable to the customer for the device is accurate.
Yeah. Good. So is there kind of what we are saying, for example, when we are getting a software from another company, so the idea is that this company is also providing us all the validation documents for that. So no need to do it ourselves when it's not our software, or what do you think?
Well, even if it's third-party software, if you're using it to, let's say if I use a third-party software to kind of validate all my outputs to show that they actually passed, and I'm referring to that pass-fail status that this tool is giving me, I need to validate that part of that tool to make sure that it is giving me a pass when it's really pass.
Okay.
So there's no false positives.
Okay, good.
So if I'm going to take credit in any process within the software development phase, and I'm using a tool to take credit for that phase or that process, that tool needs to be validated. And all the validation when it comes to the tools, especially the tools, is all risk driven. So it depends on what the tool is being used for. You can determine how exhaustive those test protocols are.
It's really great. So more work to do that in that case. So.
Yeah, but again, if you think about this as a risk-based kind of analysis early on, you have a good idea as to which tools need to be validated and which tools don't. So it's really something you want to think about early on in the process.
But at the end, so do you think we should validate those tools only once, or at each new project or each new product or each new things we have to revalidate them, or what do you think about that?
The true answer to that is that you really should, especially if the tool is being used in a different environment, you should rerun those cases in the new environment to make sure that it still works.
So it's the same as what you said. So risk is really the word that we should use here. As soon as the risk change or there is a higher risk, then we should rethink all this validation and see if it's still applicable. I think what we are using also in the medical device industry is for validation of products is like using the worst case possible. Instead of validating all the products that are similar, is just to say which one is the worst case and we validate this thing. So I think the same kind of...
it's pretty much the same. You don't need to validate the entire tool that you're using. You only need to validate the parts that you're using.
Okay.
So it's not as cumbersome as you may think. And it's also called out, by the FDA documents. Basically, any kind of testing you want to do is really you're doing it all through risk, because you want to take the least burdensome approach to the testing that you're doing. So you don't have to exhaustively test every single thing, but you need to really put time and analysis ahead of time in terms of the risk to determine what parts really need exhaustive testing.
Good. So we have now this statement for validation of tools. So if we come back to the product, so what are the next phases then for this validation?
Well, you want to, the verification is happening all throughout the development process in terms of, going from one phase to the next. As soon as you do, you write your high-level software requirements, you really shouldn't go to the next phase of writing the low-level requirements until those requirements are validated, in terms of reviewing and making sure that they're concise, and also verified as well in terms of, if you have internal standards that you follow, you want to make sure that the requirements were written against those standards. And then validation is really checking to make sure that the requirements truly conform to the intent that's wanted for that design.
Okay, good.
And that stuff goes throughout the entire process. Basically, from anytime you move from one phase to the next, you really have to do some verification, validation, make sure that everything is buttoned up before you move to the next phase.
Yeah, and a lot of people will come to us at a different point in the project for our services. For instance, they'll come to us with code but no requirements, or they'll come to us with some code and the wrong requirements, and now you've basically wasted time and money. Okay. So the process is very important to follow it this way. It may sound, from the beginning to be cumbersome as far as being so rigid, but it does save you time and money in the long run. To make sure that when you are creating the code that it's correct and that you will be able to test it very easily and get your product to market quicker.
Okay, good. When you are saying you should verify or validate at each step, so how does it look? So is it just a meeting with people, or it's a form to check, and who is doing exactly that?
It's different for every project. In terms, like I said before, it's really risk driven. So you can have it in a kind of a design review meeting before you move on to the next phase with a group of people. You can, if it's a larger job and it's, definitely the parts that you're looking at is safety critical, then you may want to do a more in-depth kind of review of each individual requirement and take a little more time in the analysis part of it. The other important thing to keep in mind too, early on, you always want to keep track of any kind of traceability that you have, because especially with traceability, the longer you wait, the more difficult it becomes to go back and try to backstep your process, to try to trace back stuff as opposed to tracing it down from the beginning. Traceability is very important in any kind of V&V activity.
And that is one of the areas that has been the big difference, one of the big differences between Europe and the rest of the world and the United States and the FDA is that low level of traceability. It's something that everyone else is adjusting to, and it's very difficult to do if you did not plan for it and did not have the right processes and procedures in place at the time.
Okay, so when we are talking about traceability, is traceability of documents or traceability of the different versions of our code or this kind of thing?
Traceability, pretty much everything. I mean, traceability of the in the V&V process, basically, when we're dealing with any class 2 or class 3 devices here with the FDA, we need to make sure that every test case that we create traces to an actual requirement. And so there's no gaps. You don't have more requirements than you have the test protocols, or you don't have additional protocols that aren't needed due to the requirements. So you always, basically for us, even all the way down to the unit test level, every single test case is driven by a low-level requirement that's directly traced to it. And that also helps out with regression testing, because now if the change comes in, you can look at the requirements and automatically see which test cases are affected by that requirement and know and be able to quickly see the impact analysis of that change in a higher scale.
As you mentioned, so it's also to avoid to waste time, to waste money, to have the good justification when we have done this or we have done that. Also to avoid to redo the same mistakes, because if you have done mistakes once, you change it and you didn't track that, so you come back to the same mistake again. So I think really it's a good practice, if I can say, to execute that.
Yeah, so I mean, we do see a lot of companies that they kind of don't do that kind of traceability, and then what happens is that they end up spending and wasting a lot more money and time in the regression testing when that time could have been spent on the initial device and made sure that you're putting out a device that properly works with all the traceability. If you don't have that traceability, now the regression testing becomes a lot more difficult, because now you have to, and a lot more risk involved too, because now you don't have a clear understanding as to what test cases are affected by the change.
Okay, so if we go back, so when we have a start of a project, we want to create a software or product. So the first thing that we have to do is first as we said, to plan. So meaning to reserve all the requirements. I mean, it's kind of the customer requirements, what exactly they want, what they need, and to track that, because this is mainly what we'll use at the end to validate the process and to say this is exactly what people wanted. And then when we are saying that we are going phase after phase for the creation, I think, of the code, for the debugging maybe of the code, for all those activities. And when we go from phase to phase, we have to go to verify each step one by one before to move to the next step. So is there kind of, so I know that there is a flow, I think it's a V&V flow. So this is going from top to down and from down to top again. So can you explain a bit more about this this process, or this vision, or this V, if I can say?
Mm-hmm. You want me to?
Yeah. So when you're doing this process and you start with the intended use, it's very systematic in how it becomes more granular as you come out. You break it out in more detail each step as you go. So as Rafael was saying, we have the high level requirements, and then you also have low level requirements that we can use to test each unit of code and each module. So at that point, that will trace up to the low level requirements, and from there we'll trace up again to the architecture, and trace up again to the system design, and trace up again to the high level requirements. So the traceability will break down as you're developing the code, and if you're validating each step, you'll be able to trace from the bottom all the way back up to the very top very easily. And that's what the FDA will do. They will look at your top level documents and follow a path all the way down to the unit level, especially safety critical, or a part of a machine that is extremely safety critical, and see that you've done the work all the way down to the very lowest level and traced it back up to the top. And that is what is required for a class 3 device.
Okay, and to go through all those steps, so do we need many kind of skills, or just IT skill is sufficient, or what kind of SME, if I can say, we need to go through all those steps?
I'll just tell you really quickly that our testing group, which is completely independent from the development group, which is why the I in IV&V is there, the people who develop the code cannot test the code. Okay. That's very important. So it's a very unique culture on the testing side, because it's so focused and very important. And obviously you have to have high quality on what you're doing. And it's a very special person. So it takes about 3 months for someone to come up to speed in order to start testing live code for us. And only about half the people make it through that 3 months in order to do this. So it's not something that anyone off the street can do right away. We have our own tools that work in conjunction with off-the-shelf tools. So that combination is something that makes us a lot more efficient and good at what we do, but it also allows more people to be able to test the code. And still, only 50% of the people make it those first 3 months to get to test live code, because this is part of our business that's so important. When you're talking about life and death, which is what we're talking about here, that you have to be absolutely perfect with what you do. And then, Rafael and his group had to do a very good job training people and constantly retraining people on new tools and new steps and processes that we interject into our processes to make them more efficient. So,
okay. So as you said, so this person has to do a lot of tests. So mainly, as Rafael said, it's mainly about the requirements that we have defined at the beginning that needs to be testable, if I can say, that if we cannot test them, we cannot confirm that it's working well. So this is the things that we define at the beginning that people will get then and spend, I don't know, as you mentioned, a lot of time to really test each step one by one. Are we doing the test only once, or is it something that we are doing like for reproducibility, that we are doing maybe 2 or 3 times with 3 people, or how is it working?
It really depends on the testing phase, but typically, especially with class 2 and class 3 devices, we have formal code reads that we do for each function that's created. So not just integration testing and system testing. We're looking at the functions by themselves. So we do a separate formal code read. We also do a formal unit test on top of that that's independent from the development team, and all those things trace up to low-level requirements. But those particular tasks are done by individual engineers. So it's not done with a group of people at once. So code reads and unit tests are done by individuals. Integration and system testing can be done by a couple people at a time, bouncing ideas back and forth in terms of making sure that the system and the integration testing is done in a robust manner. And we're trying to, because what you want to do is think about ways to break it and make sure that the system handles any kind of faults that are sent to it. So it's really, you have to have a really detailed, oriented kind of thinking to make sure that you try to cover all the risks, all the trouble areas that you can.
So in terms of collaboration then with the companies that you are working for, so are you integrated fully to a project, or they are just sending you a software and saying to you, here is the software, can you test it, or how is it working there?
It's all over the place. we get all kinds of jobs. Some of them already started, some of them halfway tested and they can't finish it.
Okay.
And that was tested completely, supposedly, and did not go through certification because of issues, and they want us to go back and fix it. And we have jobs where we create the prototypes from scratch, where we do the whole development, the design, the hardware components, the software, the testing, and everything. So it depends. It's all we get all kinds of jobs.
And when I suppose when we go to, for example, to FDA or to any regulatory body, so what is the main reason to refuse or to reject an application for a product?
It's all over the place. If it's gone through us and we have given deliverables to the customer, it doesn't get rejected. Usually we'll get a question or two, and that's really about it. But customers that come to us with rejected, usually it's because the reports weren't accurate and it didn't show traceability from the top to the bottom and back up again. That's usually where the problems occur. They probably started with some really smart people making really great code. That great code wasn't safety critical code. So it didn't trace through, the requirements didn't match, and the device does, and I say this in air quotes, it does what they wanted it to do, but they just didn't document it correctly to show that they're proving that point to the FDA.
Okay. So documentation is really one of the biggest reasons for that. So we can have the best code or the best product or best software. As soon as we have not the right documentation, we can lose time, lose everything, and have to start back from. Should we start back from zero in that case, or should we just correct documents, or what's the kind of a strategy?
That sometimes is a very heated discussion here with the customer, because a lot of times customers don't want to hear that their code is really bad because people worked on it, correct? So we show them why and explain to them why good code isn't necessarily safety critical code. And then we work through the process with them, and then we tell them the cost to redo it from scratch or to try to fix it, and then they make the determination. And I can tell you right now that if they spend $1 million getting it to that point, our alternatives are probably double or triple that to fix it or do it the right way from scratch. So they should have just done it that way to begin with. Okay, great. And in terms of regulations, so as we discussed about FDA and Europe, so do you think there is a major differences, or a software that is approved by FDA can be rejected by European Union, or is there any similarities?
I think there's a lot of similarities. I think the difference before the new MDR that's coming out, that just came out in 2017 is more just the inspectors checking what they're supposed to check. I think the standards were in place, but I think here the difference is that they're a lot tougher in terms of enforcing those regulations than how it was before in Europe.
Okay.
So people it would be a lot easier to get away with stuff in Europe than it is here, even though the standards are very similar.
Yep.
And you think that the MDR will reinforce this, or will harmonize all this?
From what I understand, I think some of the changes that they made has to do with enforcement and making, because I think before it was just a lot quicker to get through market. Now it's going to be a lot more difficult, more time consuming, because they're going to take their time kind of making sure that everything is in place and not try to rush through it. So that is my understanding.
And it's a good thing, because in the past, we would have a European company or a company from somewhere in the world that had a CE mark come to us and say, hey, we're going to send you our documentation. Can you just flip it over for the FDA?
Okay.
And in theory, we should be able to do that. But when a lot of the testing wasn't done that they're going to be looking at and the requirements don't match, it's just not as clean, and it all has to be redone. Sometimes they would say, forget it, it's just not worth it, or they know that their product has such a marketplace or possible market share in the US that it is worth it to redo it. But our point is that if you do it to the standard to begin with, it would be valid anywhere in the world. So
right. So it's also the question from people or from manufacturers coming from outside of the US and arriving and maybe not having all the knowledge of what is required or what is needed. Maybe it's also something that is worth maybe the time for them to plan that. If in the future they plan to go to US, maybe to also understand really the regulation and what is required before to start a project, or before to think, oh, it will be easier. As you mentioned, we just have to flip the documents and to the language maybe or things, and then it's fine. We are good to go. So yeah.
Yeah.
Good. One other thing is about the validations that we discussed about. So we had talked about the process. So is it the same process or same steps that we have to follow for a software that is used in manufacturing, a software that is used in quality management system, or a software that is used for a product? So is there any differences, or we have really to go through the exact same steps?
It all, again, it depends on the risk. I mean, you want to, if you talk about safety stuff, however it's being used, you want to make sure that you have rigorous and robustness test cases to cover everything that you can think of to make sure that the system is doing what it's supposed to do. If it's not critical, sometimes you don't have to do certain phases of the validation verification process. Maybe you just have to do a code read and don't have to do unit testing, and just do the user end testing, and that's that. But typically for anything that's safety critical, you kind of have to do formalized testing for all the phases of V&V.
Yep.
So do you consider, for example, a quality management system software like a dog control software, or like a CAPA system software, or some software that are more database driven and that are just here to confirm that this is the right document, considered as a safety risk software or something like that?
Well, most tools or software that's used for any kind of 1345 process you can take credit just by doing the validation, more like user end kind of testing of the components that you're using for that particular project.
Okay.
So you don't exhaustively test that particular tool or software that you're using. But again, that's where risk comes in again. Even if it's financial risk or safety risk, you want to make sure that it's doing what it's intended to do, and whatever test cases you need to prove that's all you need for those kind of things. It's mostly the critical stuff is mostly software that live inside the device that is going to control any kind of where somebody can get seriously injured or possibly die. You want to make sure that you treat that as a safety critical component.
There are some areas that we've run into in a manufacturing company where the machine itself, the software that drives the machine that makes something that could be safety critical, could be looked at as more serious. To say it's class 3, it might not hit that level, but you definitely want to know that that there's no one attacking the system from the outside, that there's some cybersecurity measures in place so people can't change the CNC machine to make sure that a blade is correct or that the catheter is the right size and things like that. But a lot of these systems, even in the US, weren't looked at very strongly until just a few years ago. And a lot of people have had systems in place for 15, 20 years, just making simple little metal parts and wrapping them in a package and then labeling them and sending them out. And they have no idea how it's supposed to work. They have no requirements. So they know that when they put a part number in that box, that it tells them the inventory location and the price. And my question to them is, how do you know that? Well, that's the way it's always worked. But do you have a document that tells you that it's supposed to work this way and that we can test it to prove that it's working correctly? And that's where the issues can come in.
Okay, great. So in terms of software, I have also another example. So now we are in an era where we are starting to see a lot of devices that are connected, devices that are helping us, if I can say, in our own life, and also a lot of device that starts to have some kind of artificial intelligence. So for me, artificial intelligence is not really a software that is locked, if I can say. It's something that is always evolving. So it means that it's changing minute after minute in terms of frequency. So how can we really validate this kind of software when we don't really know where it's going, if I can say?
Sorry, let me hand it off to you. So there's 2 parts to AI that on the front lines when I talk to customers that there's 2 types of AI, I'll call it. So a device itself can go through algorithms and it needs data through testing in order to prove out that it works and that certain tests that it's performing are proven out over thousands sometimes of different tests that the device performs. Then there's AI in artificial intelligence, where it's just a software standalone device, where that's all it is just an AI device. So there's some different versions to that. And on the first part of the device, depending on how many tests need to be performed to prove that the data is real and the FDA will trust it, is really all over the board right now. Some customers want to do regression testing as quickly as possible, but coming up with the metrics to measure when it hits that threshold is still something that even the FDA is struggling with. And we're working on a device right now that has some of those AI components to it. And it's very, very difficult to say when it will be ready to hit a certain threshold. And then, Rafael can talk to you a little bit about those thresholds and how to test for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these AIs, you can have 2 different kinds. You have a fixed AI and a dynamic AI. So the fixed ones is pretty straightforward because you kind of train it beforehand, and then once it's fixed before it goes to the release, that's what you test at the fixed point to make sure that all the training data was properly used and it was active in terms of the AI. For the dynamic one, even if it's supposed to be dynamic on the field, in terms of testing, you have to make it fixed when you're doing the testing points. The only difference with the dynamic part of it is that you have to do it in multiple fixed locations to make sure that over time that it's still performing the way it's supposed to. Outside of that, there's still a lot of changes happening in terms of IV&V in relationship with AI, and it's still a lot of things are still developing. And as always, we're keeping an eye on those new developments.
Oh, it's good. I think, it will be a topic that will come more and more now. I think we are talking about AI since many years, but now I see more publications, see more articles, see more things about that. I don't know about Apple, if they are starting to think about, to work on that with their Apple Watch again, create algorithm for that. So it's I think some topics that FDA and even Europe should now tackle and really create some guidance of software companies. because without that we are a bit lost, so we don't really know what to do. So great. So thank you. I think it was really an interesting discussion. So is there anything from your side that you want to add, or you want to still inform people?
Well, if anybody would like any help or assessment on understanding where they are in the process, we're available. I think that it'll be shared at the end of the podcast. There is one item that we have incorporated into our processes and procedures that's relatively new in the last year and a half. And that's translation services. Okay. So as people come to us from around the world, anywhere from China, Japan, which are very difficult languages to translate technically, or all over Europe, and bring a device into the US, it needs to be in English for the FDA. So the translation process can be fairly simple with words, but when you're technically translating pressures and sensor information and things, we now offer that as a service. So that we can have everything translated and then put into the documentation that we're going to do here for the FDA. So that's a add-on service that we have, and it's a technical service, and it's the only one of its kind in the world that is guaranteed to be technically accurate when it's done. So other than that, our 45 years of experience is here if you need it.
Great. So I hope people, if they have some question, will contact you directly, and maybe will ask your services to help them in this long way, difficult way, as we've seen, to validate the software. So really appreciate it. So thank you very much. As I said, I will share all your details on the podcast show notes, where people can reach out to you. So mainly, I suppose you have your website on your company.
Yes, it's generaldigital.com or gdsoftwareservices.com, goes directly to our portion of the website. And, there's some overview there and some contact information. And, if we can help, we would love the opportunity. And I'd like to thank you for what you do with Easy Medical Devices, informing people. That's really the most important part of it, is making sure that people understand how important this is, and that if you can save money, even though it costs a lot of money, there is still savings there if you do it the right way. So I thank you for sharing that with people.
No, exactly. So as I've said, my objective is really to bring value to people, to inform them of what is existing. As you said, instead of making mistakes at the beginning and losing a lot of money, a lot of time, maybe there is a solution that is cheaper and that people can use. So I hope that they can also hear that and use your services for that. So thank you for that. So I say goodbye to you, and then I hope people will reach out to you, and don't forget to tell Bill that you come from this podcast if you reach out to him. So
please do.
Good. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, EasyMed Nation. So how did you find the episode? I think Bill and Rafael were really good to explain all about software validation. And I hope you'll follow all their advices, because I think they shared really a lot of experience. As they said, 45 years of experience. So I think they have a lot to tell us. And it's really good to have them on this episode and to help you. As I've said, my mission is to help you put a compliant medical device on the market. So it will be really bad if you try to have a software on the market, but it's rejected by other authorities because you forgot to follow this or that step. So Bill and Rafael also asked me to share with you an infographic, so I will put that on the show notes. It's showing exactly the different steps for validation. As we talked about the V shape, so it's mainly what it will be showing. So don't hesitate to download it and to use it really to put a compliant medical device on the market. And don't forget to also call them if you need any documentation translation from your country to the US. I think it's also important. Okay, so I think we are at the end. If you really like the episode, please put me some good reviews, 5 stars if possible. And also, don't forget also to share that with your colleagues if they are really interested by medical device regulation and standards. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye.